Cool. Thank you everyone for joining my session. Today I'm going to talk about Vue.js and how I think Vue.js is going to take the world. Okay. My name is Thiago Passos. I'm a senior consultant for 6pivot here in Brisbane, Australia. By the way, we're hiring if anyone is interested. If you want to find me on Twitter, Thiago S. Passos, and you can find me on my blog, passos.com.au. There is someone with the audio in there. Can we mute everyone? By the way. Anyway, my blog, passos.com.au, I have to admit that I haven't been really active in the last year or so. And the reason for that is that was my usual sort of office in the last year. I've been traveling with my family. I sold everything here in Brisbane and took off. And that was my home on wheels. Well, that's still my home on wheels. But right now, because of COVID, as you guys may know, we can't do that for a while. So this is just parked in front of our house. But that's a subject for another time. For the agenda today, I'm going to talk about Vue.js itself. I'm going to show you how easy it is to get started. Then I'm going to share some of the reasons why I think Vue.js is slightly better to get started than the other frameworks. And then I'm going to share also what are the next steps you should take if you want to get into the Vue.js journey. Okay, so let's start with about Vue.js. Vue.js was created by this guy here, Evan Yu, and he was in the original AngularJS team, right? I guess a lot of you there who worked with AngularJS in the past, you would know that there are major performance issues with AngularJS. So Evan Yu thought, all right, so what if I get all the bits and pieces of AngularJS that I like, but I build my own framework, but way more lightweight than AngularJS? And that's what he did. And you might find a lot of similarities between Vue.js and AngularJS, but don't mistake them two, because Vue.js is way better. So what is Vue.js? Vue.js is a progressive JavaScript framework. And what does that mean? It means that you can adopt some of the features incrementally. So you don't need to buy into the full featured framework like some of the other frameworks out there, right? Vue.js is especially good for you to implement into an existing application, into a legacy application, to bring some nice UI features to your application, all right? And of course, you can bring additional libraries to support even more sophisticated features like routing, state management, and so many others. And it's really performant. In fact, the minified and gzipped file of the core of Vue.js is only 20 KB. That's amazingly small. So here are some of the features available in Vue.js. I'm just listing a few. Don't be limited to these features. And I'm going to try to touch on most of them in the demo time, right? So the reactivity system on Vue.js is amazing. So it supports data binding components, event handling. The whole animation and transition is out of the box. Computed properties. I haven't seen computed properties in other frameworks, and it's amazing. I use it all the time. And I'm going to do that in the demo. Templates, directives, routing, state management, it's lightweight. And there is so much more to Vue.js that I hoped I had more time to show you, but it's only 1 hour talk. Let's see how we can get started. And in this talk, I'm going to do slightly different than I did in the past. So I presented this talk a few times already, including NDC Oslo. But today I'm going to do a little bit different. Okay. If you guys have VS Code installed in your machine, let's take this time to follow along, right? I know it's not a workshop, this one, but it's 1 hour, so you can follow along as I do the live demo if you want. If you're not, just you're more than welcome just to watch. Okay, and for you to get started, there are some essential skills that you're gonna need, right? The first one is HTML. If you don't have this skill yet, don't be scared. There are plenty of resources out there for you to get started. If you don't know where to get started, just hit me up and I'll share some resources with you. Then JavaScript, again, you don't need any superset JavaScript like TypeScript or anything. Just the vanilla JavaScript will do. And you don't need to be a master in JavaScript either. You're going to see how easy it is. And CSS. Again, CSS is not a mandatory thing, but it's definitely going to help if you want your application to look half decent. All right. Okay, so let's see some of the recommended tools for working with Vue.js. The first one, and that's my recommendation for any front-end development, is VS Code, right? I gotta say that when VS Code came on board several years ago, I didn't like the idea of using VS Code because I was happy enough with Visual Studio. And for me, it didn't make sense to make the switch to VS Code at all. Because Visual Studio did all that for me, right? Hashis, can you mute everyone because there are some background noise? Thank you. Yeah, so what I did eventually was to switch only the front-end development to Visual Studio and keep to Visual Studio Code and keep all the back-end development in Visual Studio. So I had this clear separation between, all right, now I'm working with TypeScript and JavaScript and all the front-end stuff with VS Code, and now I'm doing only C# code in Visual Studio. And that worked actually really, really well. And VS Code is just amazing. If you're not using, you should. Then there is the Vue.js Code Snippets. So that's a plugin for VS Code that can help you be more productive while working with Vue in VS Code, all right? There are a bunch of snippets to create a route, create a component, create a service, creating state management and all that. It's pretty handy. And finally, we have the Vue Dev Tools. Okay, so that's a plugin for Chrome and Firefox. Sorry for the Safari guys out there. It's not available for Safari, but you can still install Chrome in your Mac, right? And I wouldn't say that's a recommended tool. That's almost like a mandatory tool because we're gonna use all the time, and it's really, really handy to have that installed. Okay. All right, so demo time. If you guys have VS Code and you wanna follow along, that's the time. Okay, for this demo, I'm gonna create a to-do app, and it's a really simple app to manage a list of tasks, right? And within this demo, I'm gonna demonstrate some of the core features, okay? And I'm probably gonna be in under 15 minutes. How does that sound? Good? Awesome. It's actually pretty boring. The to-do app is almost like a Hello World V2, right? And I don't want to do that. I really don't want to do that. No, William, I'm not going to do a to-do app. Instead, what I'm going to do is I'm going to create a killer app, right? I'm still going to demonstrate the core features of Vue.js, and I'm probably going to be in under 15 minutes, but don't hold me accountable for that, all right? Okay, so let's get started. What I'm going to do now, I'm going to open VS Code. I'm just going to open the browser here next to each other. And I'm going to start with a clean HTML file, right? You can see there is nothing in there. And I'm going to bring that to the browser so I can run that. And you can see there is nothing, okay? All right, so what I'm going to start doing here, have you guys heard about Emmet? I know that there is no feedback, which is a bit annoying for an online presentation, but Emmet is a feature of VS Code. It's embedded to VS Code, and it's amazing. I use all the time, and I'm gonna demonstrate some of the features of Emmet while I'm writing the application, and you're gonna see how handy it is to know a bit of Emmet. All right. So to start with, I'm gonna use the HTML5 template, and that's part of the Emmet abbreviation. And you can see as you type along, you can see what the result of that almost a snippet is gonna be, right? So if I just go and type tab, it creates that template for me, and I can tab along on the values that I can change, right? So I'm gonna do here a killer app. I'm gonna save. Okay, so you can see that now I've got the killer app in here. All right. So there are two things that I'm gonna bring before I start writing the application. The first one obviously is Vue, right? So I'm gonna go to Vue.js.org. I'm going to click on that Get Started, and I'm going to copy that snippet here that brings the core of Vue.js in a CDN. All right, and I'm gonna just put it in here. Okay, and the next thing I'm gonna bring is Bootstrap. I'm not a CSS person, I'm not a designer, and that's why I use Bootstrap. So it helps me to build a half-decent looking application without much effort. All right, so I'm just gonna go here and click on Get Started. And I'm just gonna copy the CSS for now, right? Because I'm not gonna need the JavaScript stuff from Bootstrap. Just gonna paste here. All right, cool. So now my application has everything that I need to get started, okay? So what I'm gonna do now, I'm gonna use Emmet again, and I'm going to create a div with an ID app, all right? So you can see the result of what Emmet is gonna bring me. And this div is gonna be the template of my Vue application, all right? Which I'm gonna show you in a second. And I'm also gonna put a CSS class called container. And inside that, I'm just gonna put a header one, all right? Cool, and that's gonna be the killer app, all right? Nothing fancy so far. Okay, all right, so now let's bring Vue.js. But before I bring Vue.js itself, I just wanna show you how the Vue DevTools look in Chrome before I introduce Vue.js, right? So you can see here, I'm just gonna zoom in for a second. You can see here that Vue is grayed out, right? So Vue is not detected. So as soon as I bring Vue.js in, as soon as I create my first Vue.js application, this thing is gonna turn green, and then I'm gonna be able to use that, all right? And the next thing that you need to know, if you just install that and you're following along, make sure that you go to Manage Extension and you allow access to file URL, okay? Because I'm just using that through the file through this killer-app.html. I'm not creating any server to serve that file. So you need that to be enabled to be able to use that DevTools in the application. All right, back here to the HTML. What I'm going to create a script block, and I'm going to create a new variable called app, and I'm going to instantiate a new Vue component. All right. Okay, so the first thing we're going to need here for this Vue component is where this Vue component is going to be bootstrapped into. What's the template of this component, right? And that's going to be the root component. Okay, so what I'm going to do, I'm going to set the element I want to bootstrap that application into. And what I'm going to do is the hash app. So it's just a normal selector, all right? So with that, Vue is going to find that div, and that it's going to use that as the template for the application, okay? So there are a few things that I'm going to cover in this demo. And one of the beauties about Vue.js is the way Vue.js has a clear separation between the concerns. Okay, so if you work with Angular before, you're gonna notice a really big difference. So what I'm gonna do here, I'm gonna start this data object, and that's where the whole state of that Vue component is gonna live, right? The methods is gonna hold all the methods of the component, all right? The computed is gonna hold all the computed properties for that component, and so on and on. And the other thing that I'm gonna bring, which initially didn't make sense, is the lifecycle hooks, right? If I were to choose, I would think that lifecycle would leave something like that, and then I could set the lifecycles, but they live in the root of the component. Anyway, so the lifecycle hook is a way that we can hook into lifecycle events of the component and do something about it, right? So in this case, I'm going to use the created lifecycle hook to bring some data in as soon as the component is created, okay? It's like to trigger the start of the application. Okay, so from there, you can see how the structure is and how simple it is to find stuff in your component, all right? But the first thing I'm going to show you here is to create a new property in the data section. And I'm going to create here a killer app, NDC Sydney, right? Good, so now I can use this title anywhere, in any method, in any computed property, in the created lifecycle hook, or in the template itself. So how do I bind this property into the template? So the first one will be by using the interpolation, the double curly braces. So I can simply put title here, and now when the application starts, it's going to bring that killer app-NDC Sydney to my template. Okay, so if I go here to the browser now and refresh, you can see that now I've got that killer app NDC Sydney. Cool. And the other thing we have is also the dev tools. So now it became green, and now I can check some stuff out. All right. And to test that, I'm just going to bring the dev tools here at the bottom. All right. I'm just going to zoom in a little bit. Oh, not this way. Just want to use this way. All right. Cool. And I'm going to bring the Vue DevTools here. Okay. So right now I only have one instance, which is the root. And inside of root, I have data. And inside of data, I have the title, killer app-NDC Sydney. Okay. And the next thing I'm going to show you, I'm going to demonstrate to you is the reactivity. So the reactivity of Vue.js is amazing and it's really similar to a lot of the other frameworks, but it's really cool that you can change here and see that the change detection kicking off and changing everywhere that property is being used. Okay, so to demonstrate that, I'm just going to change this value here to NDC Sydney 2020. And as soon as I save that, you can see that the template changed straight away. And I can use that in the browser, in the console as well, because I've got an app variable, right? So if I go to title, I can bring the title. And if I want to update the title from here as well, which is something that you wouldn't do, but you can. So if I want to say just killer app, you can see that the template changed. So the change detection of Vue.js is embedded. So it's not something that you need to trigger or anything like that. It just works. Okay. All right, that's probably enough for this hello world here. And the next thing we're going to do, since this is a killer app, I need to kill someone, all right? And to kill someone, I have to have someone to kill. And to start with that, I'm going to bring this API here, which is just a JSON file from GitHub with a list of a bunch of characters. So if you're following along, I'm just going to paste this link into room 4 if you're gonna use, right? And what I'm going to do now, I'm going to query that API, and I'm going to get the values from that API and put in the app, right? I'm going to use the created lifecycle hook, okay? And I'm going to use the fetch API, which is the JavaScript default fetch API, right? So you don't need to install any dependencies or any package for that. If I were creating a real life application, I would use something like Xuse, which is a superset of the Fetch API with many more features, right? But for now, the Fetch API will do just nice. All right, I'm just going to paste that URL here. And what I'm going to do is when the result comes back, I'm going to get the JSON portion of that result. And then I'm going to get that value and store somewhere in my data, right? And for that, I'm going to create a characters list array, right? And now I'm going to get that result and put that in the characters array, okay? And that's going to come from the characters property. Okay, so that's the result of the API, and that's the property I'm going to set to. And just to test, I'm going to come here to the template, and I'm going to bind that character, the list of characters, to here. Okay. So when I save that and I run the application, you should see a bunch of characters coming through. Right? Easy as that. Okay, but that looks quite ugly. So let's do something about it. With that, I'm going to demonstrate another feature. Right? I'm going to bring here the div row and div call3 from Bootstrap, just so I can have some nice formatting. Okay, so what I'm going to do here, I want this portion of the HTML to repeat for each of the characters, right? So I'm going to loop through the characters array, and I want that part of the HTML to repeat itself for every single character, okay? So I'm going to use the v-for, which is a way that you can loop through an array. And I'm going to bring character in characters, all right? The one thing that you need to do here in the v-for, which is going to make application more performant, is to set the key for that iteration, all right? So if anything changes in that characters array, instead of Vue trying to write the whole thing again, or the whole HTML again in the DOM, instead of doing that, it's going to know exactly which part of the DOM it needs to refresh. So the key attribute in this instance is quite important, okay? And for that, we're going to use the attribute binding of Vue.js, which is a vbind and key, okay? The vbind is for you to bind to any attribute in HTML. It could be the value of an input. It can be any custom attribute or any attribute really, okay? And inside of that, that's going to be something that Vue.js is going to calculate, right? So what I'm going to do is I'm going to bring the index of that array to be a unique key for that iteration. And to be able to bring the index, I'm just going to pass the index here as well. All right. So now Vue.js is going to loop through that that array, and it's going to print a bunch of call3 here. And so we can see, I'm just going to put a header 3 here, and I'm going to bind to the character name. Okay. So when I save that and refresh. Okay. Oh, that's weird. There you go. I don't know why it wasn't working for that other instance. Anyway, so here we go. We've got the killer app, NDC Sydney, and a list of characters. Which is great. It's starting to look a little bit nicer. Okay. The next thing I want to bring here is an image, and I'm going to set the source attribute of that image, so you can see that the vbind working for that as well. All right. So vbind source, and in here I'm going to bring the character image dump. I think that's the name of the property. Let's see. If I save that, refresh, I'm bringing the image of the characters. Cool. So there is one thing here about the vbind, and it's a shorthand from Vue, right? So if you think the vbind is a bit wordy, you can remove that, and that's the shorthand. That's going to work the same way as vbind colon. Just the colon is a shorthand for that, right? So I'm going to save, and just so you can see that working, it's still working. Okay. One thing that I'm going to do here, I'm not liking the way that some characters have an image, so I'm going to ditch all the characters with no image. And for that, I'm just going to bring here to the result of the API and filter out all the characters with no image. So I'm just going to bring the characters with image, right? If I save that, refresh, cool, I have characters only with image. Cool. Awesome. That's working. All right. Okay, so the next thing, it is a killer app. I need to kill someone, right? So let's do that. And for that, I'm just going to create another row here at the top. And this row will have a single, and I'm going to add a button in here, all right? And this button will have a text kill, and the class will be the Bootstrap class, btn and btn primary, okay? So that's how it looks here. And as soon as I click on the kill button, I want the component to trigger something, okay? And now I'm going to demonstrate the event binding. So with the event binding, you can do the v-on, colon, and any HTML5 event, all right? So you can use the click, you can use the key up, you can use the hover, you can use a lot of the, all the events from HTML itself. I'm going to use the click here. And as soon as I click the button, I want to run a queue method, all right? And the queue method, as you can imagine, come on mouse, is going to live in the method section. I'm going to create a queue method here, and off I go. Before I move on to the queue method, I just want to show you another shorthand for that, all right? So we've got the V on here, but there is a shorthand for event binding, which is just the at, okay? So you can use either, they work the exact same way, all right? Okay, so now what I'm going to do here, I'm going to create a variable called bastard, all right? And this bastard is going to be just a random person from that array. So I'm going to get the count of that array. Okay. And now I'm going to remove that, the bastard from the array itself. So I'm going to get the characters, and I'm going to use the JavaScript method called splice, which is going to remove an item from the array. And I'm going to pass the index and the count of items I want to remove. All right, so once I click that, it's going to randomly pick one character, and it's going to remove from the array. I don't need to do anything for the template to be refreshed because it knows exactly what to do, right? So as soon as remove an item from the array, it's going to remove from the DOM as well, all right? So I'm just going to refresh these. Let me save that, refresh. And if I click, you can see nothing is happening. Well, it is happening, but it's not killing anyone in the first page, right? So let's see what is going on. So if we bring the view DevTools, we've got 255 characters, and as we click, it's not removing really. Slice, poor bastard. What did I do wrong? So let me refresh here. Fail demo. Cool. So what is happening? Sorry. All right, so it is calling. Which, that's, there you go. That's times, not plus. That's why. I think someone told me that. Anyway. All right, back here, back on board. If we click here, there are some failures here because of the image is not available anymore, but anyway, that's working. So if we go to the Vue DevTools, bring it up, so you have 248 characters, and as we queue, you can see that number changing straight away. All right, so this is working. Cool. But there is an event on Game of Thrones that has queued more people than one by one, right? And that's not, I'm not going to count the last event of Game of Thrones. That would queue like all the cast. I'm just gonna queue some more than one. All right, so I'm gonna create another one here. And can you guess what event queued a lot of people in Game of Thrones? Yeah. That feedback of an online talk is amazing. So it's a red wedding. All right. So I'm gonna do the same thing here, but I'm gonna send a flag that says that it's a red wedding, and I'm going to use the danger button. All right. So in the queue, I'm gonna receive a flag, red wedding, and in here, what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna get a count. If it's red wedding, I'm gonna use half of the cast. Otherwise, I'm just gonna use one, and I'm going to loop through that count. Okay. And also, I need to make sure that the number of characters is more than one. Otherwise, I won't have anyone standing. Okay. And I'm just gonna count minus minus. Cool. All right, saving that. Back here. Now I've got a red wedding. So I've got a question here. Where is the URL for the fetch? I just posted on the Room 4 Slack channel. Okay. So if you can to get that. Yeah, Chris, you were the one who said replace plus with the star. Thanks, mate. I should have seen your message before. Anyway, all right, so I've got a list of characters here. I've got 255, and when I click red wedding, now I have only half of the cast, and so on and on, until only one is standing. Well, only two. There should be one. Okay, count is more than 0. Okay, because I want to have only one standing. Cool. Priya is the one standing. All right. Cool. That's working. And the next thing I want to demonstrate to you is the conditional renderer. All right. And for that, I'm going to create a header one here, and I'm going to use the v-if. Okay. All right. So this v-if will take into consideration whatever is inside that double quote, and if that is true, then it's going to render that H1 into the DOM. Otherwise, it's not. All right. So what I'm going to do here, I'm going to check if the characters length is equals 1. All right. So if it is equals 1, what I'm going to do here is I'm going to say king or queen of the 7 kingdoms. All right. So now what's going to happen is this one is going to be rendered only when there is only one character standing. Okay. So if I refresh the page here and I go and click red wedding, then the last one has this king / queen of the 7 kingdoms. Cool. So that's working. There are a few ways that we can improve this app, right? Especially that VIF. And that's what I'm going to demonstrate next, not with the VIF, but with something else. Okay. I'm going to demonstrate now the computed property. And for that, what I want to do, let me just refresh this page here. What I want to do is I want to filter the characters that I have listed in there. Okay. For example, if I want to search for stock, there are so many characters that I have to scroll all the way down to find whoever I want to find, right? So I'm going to create this search functionality by implementing a computed property. Okay, so let's go there. So I'm going to create here another div row, and another div called 12. And inside of there, I'll have an input of type text with a form control CSS class. And again, that's image, right? Tab, and I've got that input there, all right? I'm actually going to demonstrate two things here. One is the two-way binding, and one is the computed property. So the first one is the two-way binding, all right? So let me remove that. I'm going to set that to keyword. And I'm going to use the V model, all right? So when I use the V model, Vue.js is going to bind that property, which I haven't created yet, I'm going to create, to this element here. So when this value is available in the component, it's going to set the value of the input. Or if I change the value in the input, it's going to automatically change the value in the component. So that's how the two-way binding works. All right, so I'm going to go to the data now, and I'm going to create a keyword. All right, and for now, that's going to be empty. So I'm going to save that. And so I can demonstrate the two-way binding. I'm going to go there to the top. I'm going to bring the Vue Dev Tools here. You can see the keyword is empty. If I change that to, let's say, stock, you can see that change in the input. And obviously, if I change anything here, it changed in the Vue Dev Tools. All right, so that's how the two-way binding works. All right, but now let's write up that keyword to some sort of filter so I can see the characters I want. Okay, so now I'm going to create the computed property. So the computed property is pretty amazing. It's going to behave as a normal property when you see from the template side of it. It's going to look like a method when you see how it's formatted in the computed property. But the beauty of it, and the computed property is only used for displaying data, right? So don't try to change any data in the computed property, otherwise it's not going to perform the way you expect, right? The way it works is it's gonna, as you write your code in the computed property, Vue.js is gonna automatically create these dependencies between the computed property and the values that you used. And the computed property value, the outcome, is gonna change only if any dependency changed. So that value, the outcome, is gonna be cached, all right, which is pretty amazing. And that was one of the main issues with AngularJS back in the day, because the change detection would try to change everything, and the performance would just be poor. Where here, because of the caching, that is really performant. Okay, so let's create that. I'm gonna create a computed property called filtered characters. Okay, as you can see, it looks like a method. And wow, Still has 20 minutes. All right. And what I'm going to do here is I'm going to return that list of characters, and I'm going to filter that. And I'm going to filter that by the name, all right, the character name. If there is an index of the keyword, all right, I'm just going to put that to lowercase, all right, so we don't have issues, and to lowercase here. Again, we don't have issues. And if the index of is greater or equal to 0, then I'm going to return that new list of characters, all right? So I don't need to trigger anything here. I don't need to specify that I want to show it differently. It's just it, right? And the other thing is, if the keyword is not available, obviously I want to return the whole list, all right? So now, how do I use that? So I can just bring the filtered characters and replace that in the list of characters. All right. In the first place, because I don't have a keyword, it's going to behave the exact same way it was behaving before. Right. So if I come here and refresh the page, you can see I have the whole list of characters. But if I come here and start typing stock, you can see that list is filtered with every single change. All right. That's the beauty of computer property. Cool. I think that's it for this demo, and I'm afraid I don't have that much time to go over more stuff in this demo, so I'm going to jump back into my slide deck. Okay, so the next demo is going to be about the Vue CLI. All right, so I'm going to brush a little bit on this one, but the Vue CLI is the way you would use to create a larger application. See, so if you want to bring the full-featured framework of Vue, that's the way you would go, right? So the first option I showed you with the killer app is something that you would do to implement in a legacy application, or if you want to implement just parts of the application and you don't want to bring the full-featured framework, all right? But let's check with the Vue CLI, all right? So I'm gonna jump back here, and what I'm gonna bring this time is the console. Oops, the command. All right, I'm just gonna clear that. Just increase that a little bit. Cool. All right. So once you install the Vue CLI, and to install the Vue CLI is just npm install globally add Vue CLI. I'm not going to do that because I already have the Vue CLI, and that would take some time. But once you have installed, you have this Vue command, and this Vue command will help you creating a new application. All right, or do other stuff. Okay, so what I'm going to demonstrate here is choose the Vue create, and then I'm going to pass the name of an application, new app, let's say. And with that, the Vue CLI is going to bring some defaults or an option to select the features I want for this application. Okay, so you can see that it also provides the Vue 3 preview here. What you saw so far is all about Vue 2. So they are just rolling out the Vue 3, but don't worry about it. Everything you have learned for Vue 2 is still applicable for Vue 3. There is no breaking change, which is amazing. But Vue 3 has a few other features. But anyway, what I can do here, I could select just the default, which brings Babel and ESLint, or I could go for the preview, or I could also select manual features. So if I click there, you can see some of the options that I can bring straight away. Where I can bring the router, Vuex, which is the state management. I can bring Sass or some other CSS preprocessor if I want. I can bring the unit test, the end-to-end test, or I can make my application to use TypeScript from start, right? I'm not going to create the app from here right now because I have created one previously, and that's going to save me some time. So the one I created was one with the default features, which is just with Babel and ESLint. And I'm going to go there now. So it's the demo app. And for that, what I'm going to do is I'm going to show you how the application is structured when you use the Vue CLI, right? So I've got that open here. So as you can see, the demo app, the first thing you're going to see is the node modules, which some people would say that's the whole internet. It's all the dependencies of your application and dependencies of the dependencies of the dependencies. They're all going to live in these node modules, all right? If you've done any Node.js or any front-end development, you probably know about the node modules. The public folder would hold any static files, including the index.html, which is going to be the entry point of your application. All right, so the index.html is not necessarily static because Vue.js, the Vue CLI is going to inject some stuff in the file, but the rest is pretty much static. So if you want to put images, icons, or extra CSS or anything like that, you can put in the public if you want. The source folder is going to hold all your source code for your application. So that's all yours, right? So inside there, you can see we have assets, which again is like the static file, but it's a little bit smarter. And we have a folder called components for any reusable components. The app view is going to be the start component or the root component. And the main.js is how the whole thing is going to be wired up. So let's have a look at the main.js to start with. All right, so you can see that it's bringing Vue, which is the Vue framework, and it's bringing the app component, which I'm going to touch in a second. And then it's going to render that and mount to that app instance, to the div with the ID app, right? So it looks really similar to the way I did, right? But what is this Vue component? So why is that so different from JavaScript? So the Vue component is a combination of the template, the script, and the style, right? So you're always going to find these sections in a Vue file. You don't need necessarily all of them, but you're usually going to find some of them in there. So you can have only one of each, all right? So that's the template of the component. That's the smarts of the component, the script, and that's the style, all right? So the way it's working here right now, so it creates that component, it's bringing that hello world component across, and it's defining the component, and it's using that component in here and defining a simple message to that hello world, okay? In the hello world component, the only difference you're gonna see here, well, the template's a bit bigger, but then you have these props, which is a way that you can communicate from the parent component to a child component. So that's the property that the app view is sending to the hello world, okay? And one thing that's nice to point out here is this scoped style for the hello world component. It is really recommended for any reusable component. If you have any style for that component, you set as scoped. And what this is going to do is all that style that you have in there is going to be limited to that component only. So you're not going to mess with the whole application, only with that component, all right? Okay, I think that's enough for this. What I'm going to do is I'm just going to run the application so we can see it running. And I'm going to run by running npm run serve, okay? And now what I can see here, if I run the localhost 8080, I have my application running. And the beauty of using the CLI is any change I make to the application. So let's say that I want to change this to welcome to NDC Sydney, right? So as soon as I save that, that change is applied to the browser. So I don't even need to refresh the browser. So it just goes seamlessly, which is great, right? All right, so let's introduce a new feature to this application so you can see how it works. So I'm going to run here Vue add, which is to add a new feature, and I'm going to add the router, all right? So the way this works is this is going to introduce a new feature to the application. It's going to change a few things in the application itself. So I have some start points. And also it's going to bring the packages necessary to run that feature. All right. I'm not going to worry about committing any changes here. I'm just going to go ahead. And it's going to ask me one extra thing. So it's going to ask me if I wanted to use the history mode. If you don't know what the history mode is, if you've done any front-end development, you're going to see that hash in the address bar, right? And if you don't want to use that hash in the address bar, then you want to use the history mode. There are some downsides of using the history mode. I personally prefer to use the history mode, but the downside is you need to configure your server to fall back to the index.html if it can't find that path in the server. So if it's not an image or anything in the server, you need to fall back to the index.html and let the front end handle the routing. That's basically it. All right. Okay, so let's go ahead, introduce this feature. And I'm gonna, as soon as this finishes, I'm gonna run the application. I think I've got 10 minutes. So I can see that happening. All right, so let me clear that. npm run serve. Okay. All right. So now what I have here with the routing is I have multiple routes, and it creates this navigation bar at the top for me. So if I click home, I go home, or I can click on about and go back and forth. All right. So you can see it's not using, it's using the history mode, so there is no hash in here. And if I go straight to the URL, it still works because I'm running locally with the Vue CLI. But if you deploy that to somewhere, you have to take into consideration the fallback. Anyway, that's pretty much it. Let me go back to the source code here so I can show you how it creates that stuff for me. So then in the app view, the main difference here, instead of bringing the hello world component, it changed slightly. So now I've got the router view, which is where the route itself is going to be rendered. And I have the navigation here. So you can see that the anchor link is slightly different. So I'm now using the router link, which turns into an anchor link after. And that's the route I want to go to, okay? Simple as that. In the route, it defines all the routes for me. So it creates this home route, all right, and this about route. You can see again that they are slightly different. And the reason for that is Vue.js is giving you some hints on how to do things differently, okay? And this example here is how you can do the lazy loading for your routing, okay? So the home is going to be part of the main JavaScript chunk, as you may call it. And that's going to be loaded super quick. And the about is going to be in a different chunk of JavaScript. And this part is going to be loaded only when you go to the route. So that's how the lazy loading works. And this is really handy when you have a really large application and you want your homepage to load super quick, and you only load the rest as the user navigates through your application. So for example, you don't want the user to bring the admin route if the user doesn't even have access to the admin route. Okay, so that's how you can separate and make your application even smaller and faster. Okay, so in the view, there are also components. As you can see, the about is just a simple component with a template, and the home component, it looks really similar to the way the app view component looked like before. So we're importing the hello world component, and we're using the hello world component here. So you might be asking, what if I want the hello world component to be usable by many other components? Do I need to import every time? And the answer is no. You can define that hello world component globally. And if it is defined globally, you can use anywhere without needing to import every time. Okay. But I'm not going to cover these right now. If you have any questions about that, you can come back to me and I'll be happy talk to you about it. Okay, so that was enough for this demo here. Okay, and what I'm going to do now, I'm going to share some of the reasons why I think Vue.js is great comparing to the other frameworks, and why you should use it. Okay. Out there, nowadays, we have the three major frameworks. All right, so we've got React, Angular, and Vue. They're all amazing. I recommend all of them. They're all great. But when it comes to a framework that you want to start developing, a framework that you want to start learning, Vue.js is going to be the easiest one. And if you're starting your front-end development journey, that's definitely the one that I would recommend. But let's go one by one. Let's go to React. So React is from Facebook. It's highly used everywhere. It's probably one of the most used frameworks. But the fact that one thing that I don't like about React, and that's a personal opinion, is the fact that the HTML and the JavaScript is entangled in each other. Like, that feels so classic ASP. It feels so dirty to me. I don't really like about it. But the other fact that it's not that I don't like, but for beginners, that's going to be pretty hard, is the fact that React is really non-opinionated. And what does that mean? It means that the opinions coming from people will be embedded to the application itself, not to the framework, because the framework itself, it lets you choose whatever you want and do whatever you want in whatever way you want, right? Which it makes really hard for beginners to know how to structure the application, which sort of components or features they want to use and stuff like that. It's really hard not to have this guidance, right? To trust always in some more experienced developer, right? And that's one of the facts that I think React is not a good one to start with if you're starting in your front-end development journey, all right? And then it brings to Angular. Angular is great. I love Angular. I've been using Angular for, I don't know, the past 7 years or even more. Can't remember. I started with AngularJS, then moved to Angular 2, and eventually they ditched the 2, and it was only Angular. And then they had Angular 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, whatever. I think they're in Angular 10 now. Anyway, I like Angular. I have nothing too bad to say about Angular. But Angular, you either buy into the full framework or you go home, right? That's how Angular works. So you can't really bring Angular, the new Angular, not AngularJS, to a small portion of your application, right? You either bring the whole thing or it's really hard, okay? And one of the facts about Angular that makes it harder to start is the fact that you need to have a lot of background knowledge to start with Angular. So you don't start with only HTML and JavaScript. You have to have TypeScript, and you have to have a lot of other skills that makes it harder to get started. So the learning curve is way steeper than Vue.js. And then it comes Vue.js. So Vue.js is highly used as well. You could see that how easy it was to start. I assume you found easy. But for me, one of the easiest ones to get started is Vue.js. And on top of that, Vue.js is the one with the most number of stars on GitHub. And why does that matter? It matters because the community behind Vue.js is enormous, is amazing, right? So you can see that a lot of people are using and contributing to Vue.js. So here are some of examples of people using Vue.js in their production applications. And you might ask, all right, so is the user base, is a large application with a large user base would be good for Vue.js application? And my answer would be definitely, like for sure, like 100%. And here are some of the examples for that. So for example, Bilibili, which is this one here, it's like a YouTube sort of application in China. They have about 50 million users last time I checked, right? So that's pretty big. And then we have Alibaba. Alibaba is this one here with 231 million annual users, active users. That's massive. I'm sure a lot of you guys and girls would have used Alibaba to do shopping, right? And then we have 9gag with about 150 million users a month. Last time I checked. It's amazing. That's incredible, the number of users. And Vue.js handled that just as well. All right. Okay, so what's next? What should you do next if you are interested in continue with Vue.js? The first thing is go to the Vue.js.org website. The documentation is amazing. You can learn about the ecosystem. There are a lot of cookbooks that you can follow to learn more. And it's just great. Like, you should definitely check it out. And finally, the Vue 3 is coming, okay? But don't worry about what you learned here today. They're not going to go to waste, even though it's Vue 2. Everything that you learned here is still the same in Vue 3. So there will be no breaking change, right? So there are a few things that Vue 3 introduced. So one of them is the composition API, which is a slightly different way to build a component coming from React. They improved the TypeScript support, which is great for the TypeScript people out there. I'm one of them, even though I use both. And it became even faster, smaller, and more performant than Vue 2. So they came up with other ideas to make it even faster, right? And way more than that, right? And if you're interested not only in learning by yourself about Vue, there is a workshop coming in November, and that's me and Jason Taylor. I'm pretty sure that some of you would know Jason Taylor. He's mostly known for the clean code. Anyway, so we're running this workshop in November in about a month and a half, and it's a 2-day workshop, right? So it's a full day of learning Vue and the intricacies of Vue. So if you're interested, just go to the NDC Workshops website and just sign in. And with that, I'm going to say thank you for watching. And that's it. I'm going to be here for the next, I don't know, minute or so. But you can find me on Slack if you have any questions. And that's it. Thank you guys. Thanks for watching.